The moment my neighbor grabbed my arm in the parking lot of Fairview Medical Center, I knew something was wrong. I had just come out through the side entrance after my routine blood pressure check, the kind of appointment I've been keeping every 3 months since I turned 62. My neighbor, I've known Vera since she moved to our street in Millbrook, Ohio 8 years ago, had this look on her face that I hadn't seen since the night her husband had his stroke. Urgent. Almost frightened. "Dorothy," she said, keeping her voice low even though there was nobody near us. "I need to tell you something about your son-in-law. I want you to stay with me until the end of this, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from." The first thing I noticed was her grip. Not rough, but the kind of grip you use when you need someone to stop moving. I had my car keys in my hand and my purse hooked over my elbow, and I just went still, the way you do when your body understands something before your mind catches up. Vera worked in the billing department at Millbrook General, the smaller hospital across town. She had for almost 20 years. She saw things. She knew people. And she had never once in 8 years knocked on my door to gossip. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said, "but I've been watching you for months, Dorothy. Watching you drive that same old Buick with the cracked dashboard. Watching you clip coupons on your porch on Sunday mornings. I know what a fixed income looks like, and I know what I saw." She told me she had run into my son-in-law, my daughter Felicia's husband, at the Millbrook Country Club 3 weeks earlier. Not at the entrance. Inside, at the bar, laughing with 2 men she recognized from the hospital's administrative board. He had been signing something. She had only caught a glimpse, but the figure on the document had 6 numbers before the decimal point. Then she said his name was on a charitable trust filing she had processed that week, a foundation that received large donations and made even larger transfers to a private LLC. The LLC shared an address with my son-in-law's other business. I stood in that parking lot for a long moment, the October air cold against my face, thinking about the phone call I had gotten the previous Sunday. Felicia, crying softly, telling me that things were tight again, that my grandson Eli's private school tuition was past due, that they hated to ask, but would I consider cashing out that small CD I had kept at Westfield Credit Union since my husband Edward passed. I had said I would think about it. Now I was thinking about it. "Thank you, Vera," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I appreciate you telling me." I sat in my car for 15 minutes before I started the engine. I am 66 years old. I was a high school English teacher for 31 years in the Millbrook Unified School District. I retired with a teacher's pension, a paid-off house on Sycamore Lane, and enough in savings to cover emergencies and leave something modest for Felicia when I go. Edward died of a heart attack 11 years ago, 3 months before our 40th anniversary. He had been a postal worker. We had never been wealthy, but we had been careful. Careful the way people are when they grow up without a safety net, when they know that one bad year can undo a decade of good ones. Felicia was our only child. I say that not as an excuse for what I'm about to tell you, but as context. When you have one child, everything concentrates. Every hope, every worry, every sacrifice. I had worked summers tutoring students for extra money so that Felicia could study abroad her junior year of college. I had helped with the down payment on their first house in 2019. I had babysat Eli every Thursday for 4 years so they could save on childcare. I had always told myself that's just what mothers do. She met my son-in-law at a fundraiser for the County Historical Society, which I had thought was a good sign. He had a master's degree in nonprofit management, a warm handshake, and the kind of easy confidence that fills a room without seeming to try. He talked about community. He talked about purpose. He talked about Felicia like she was the most extraordinary person he had ever met, which she is, but still. They married 2 years after they met. Small ceremony, beautiful, thoughtful. He gave a toast that made half the room cry. The request started about 8 months in. The first one was small. He was starting a nonprofit focused on arts education in underserved schools. Real work, meaningful work, and a grant had come through late. Could I cover 1 month's operating costs just until the funds cleared? $400. I wrote the check that same day. Then his car needed a repair his insurance wouldn't cover. Then there was a gap between Felicia's maternity leave and when her new pay structure kicked in. Then Eli needed speech therapy, and their plan had a high deductible. Then there was a business trip my son-in-law needed to take, and the nonprofit's travel reimbursement was delayed. Each one felt real. Each one felt urgent. And each time I told myself, this is temporary. This is just how it is when you're building something. I remember what those years felt like, but the requests kept coming, and I kept finding ways to say yes. When Felicia called me the week before I ran into Vera, I had already given them, by my rough count, somewhere around $18,000 over 4 years. I don't say that number to make you gasp. I say it because it surprised me too when I finally sat down and added it up. I had given it in small enough pieces that it had never felt like 18,000. It had felt like helping. I didn't cash out the CD. I told Felicia I needed a few days to look into the penalties for early withdrawal. That was true. It was also an excuse to buy myself time. That night I opened my laptop and searched my son-in-law's nonprofit. The website was professional, updated with photos of children holding paintbrushes and letters from partner schools. It looked legitimate. It had a 501c3 number. I searched that number on the IRS database and it checked out. Then I searched his name alongside the LLC Vera had mentioned. I couldn't find the LLC in any public-facing context. But I found a real estate record. A property in Hilton Head, South Carolina, purchased 18 months ago. A vacation home, listed under a family trust. I sat with that for a long time. The next morning I called my friend Arlene, who had worked in the development office at Millbrook Community Foundation for 15 years before she retired. She knew the nonprofit world the way I knew sentence structure, by instinct, by long practice, by knowing what a good paragraph looks like and knowing immediately when something is off. "Tell me what you've got," she said when I explained the situation. I read her what I'd found: the LLC, the trust filing Vera had described, the property. Arlene was quiet for a moment. "Do you know who's on the board of his nonprofit?" I hadn't checked. I went back to the website while she waited. There were 5 board members listed. I recognized one name, a woman who had been on the Millbrook school board when I was still teaching. The other 4 I didn't know. "Here's what I'd like you to do," Arlene said. "Call Agnes Burwell. She's one of those board members. I know her from the Community Foundation. Tell her you're a supporter who's been considering a major gift and ask if you can have a brief conversation about financial stewardship." "That feels like a deception," I said. "It is," Arlene agreed. "So is what they may be doing to you." I called Agnes Burwell that afternoon. She was warm, eager, the way people on volunteer boards tend to be when someone mentions a potential donation. We made an appointment to meet for coffee at a bakery in the Millbrook Town Square the following Tuesday. Agnes was a retired pharmacist, sharp and direct, and she loosened up within 10 minutes when she realized I wasn't there to write a check. I was there because I was concerned. I told her I had a family connection to the organization and that I had heard some things that worried me. I was vague, but I watched her face carefully, and I saw something shift. "I've concerns of my own," she said finally, setting down her coffee. "We've been asking for financial documentation for 8 months, proper audited statements, the kind every board is entitled to see. We keep being told they're being prepared. And they're still not ready." She folded her hands on the table. 3 board members have privately told me they're considering resigning. I drove home with the window down even though it was cold, because I needed the air. That Sunday, Felicia came for dinner. She brings Eli every other Sunday, and I make pot roast because it's his favorite and because some rituals feel like anchors. She seemed tired, distracted, checking her phone more than usual. At one point, she went outside to take a call, and through the kitchen window I watched her pace the length of my small backyard, gesturing, nodding. When she came back in, she said it had been her husband. He needed her to sign something for the nonprofit before Monday morning. "What kind of something?" I asked. "Just a co-signature thing," she said. He explained it, but I don't really understand that stuff. He says it's standard. I put down my dish towel. Felicia, when is the last time you personally looked at the nonprofit's bank statements? She blinked. That's not really my job. He handles all of that. You're a co-founder. Your name is on the founding documents. Did you know that? She hadn't. She thought her role was purely ceremonial, a show of family commitment, her husband had told her. I didn't say anything more that night. I didn't want to damage something I couldn't yet prove was damaged. The following week, I went to see Howard Graber, an attorney in Lakeview who had handled Edward's estate. He was semi-retired now, but his daughter had taken over the practice and Howard still came in 2 days a week. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is the sign of a good attorney, and of someone who takes you seriously. What you're describing, he said carefully, could range from poor financial management to something significantly more serious. The LLC and the real estate trust are the parts that concern me most, particularly if nonprofit funds were commingled. What should I do? Document everything you have, he said, and don't move any of your own money until we know what we're dealing with. He referred me to his daughter, Nina Graber, who specialized in financial fraud cases. She agreed to do a preliminary review. Meanwhile, Arlene had done some digging through her own channels. She found that my son-in-law had incorporated 2 previous LLCs in the past decade, both dissolved. One had been the subject of a complaint filed with the Ohio Attorney General's office. The complaint had not resulted in charges, but it was documented. The complainant had been a small business owner who claimed he had invested $22,000 in a venture my son-in-law described as a social impact consulting firm. The venture had produced nothing. When Nina Graber called me with her preliminary findings 2 weeks later, she spoke carefully but clearly. The nonprofit's 990 forms, the tax documents that nonprofits file publicly, showed inconsistencies between reported program expenses and the documentation she had been able to access. Management fees had been categorized in ways that blurred the line between the nonprofit and the LLC. It wasn't conclusive proof of fraud, but it was, in her words, a pattern that warrants serious attention. I asked what my next step should be. She said I had 2 options. I could share what I had with the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division, which oversees nonprofits in the state. Or I could confront my son-in-law directly. I chose to go to the Attorney General's office first. I want to be clear about why. I had watched enough of my own life go by to know that confronting someone without evidence gives them time to prepare, time to move money, to destroy documents, to construct explanations. I had spent 31 years teaching teenagers how stories work. I knew that the person who controls the sequence of events controls the outcome. I submitted the documentation, everything I had gathered, everything Arlene had found, the board members' concerns as represented by Agnes, the earlier AG complaint, and I filed it with the Charitable Trust Division on a Wednesday morning. The intake officer was professional and thorough. She told me they would be in contact. 2 weeks later, she called to tell me an investigation had been opened. That night, I finally told Felicia. I had thought about how to do this for weeks. I had rehearsed versions of the conversation in my head while doing dishes, while walking the block around my house in the evenings, while lying awake at 2 a.m. listening to the house settle. No version felt right. There is no good way to tell your daughter that the man she loves may have been lying to both of you. She came to my house on a Friday evening. I made tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table where she had done homework as a child, where we had celebrated her college acceptance, where we had sat together the night Edward died. I told her everything. She didn't cry at first. She went very still, the way she does when she's processing something. She's always been like that, even as a little girl, working through it internally before it reaches the surface. Then she said, "How long have you known?" 6 weeks, I said. I needed to be certain before I came to you, because you were protecting me. Because I love you, I said, and because I have been wrong before, and I didn't want to be wrong about this. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me to show her the documents. We sat at that table until midnight. She read everything, When she got to the 990 inconsistencies, she went and got her laptop and started pulling up their joint financial records, the accounts she had access to, the ones she had left to him because she trusted him. What she found, cross-referencing with the documents I had, was worse than I had suspected. There were transfers from the nonprofit's operating account to the LLC on dates that corresponded exactly with her husband, telling her the nonprofit had cash flow problems. The nonprofit's supposed cash flow problems had been the reason for most of the requests to me. She slept in her old room that night, Eli asleep in the guest room where I keep his things. The confrontation happened the following week, not at their house and not alone. Felicia's attorney was present. She had moved fast, and I was proud of her for that. My son-in-law came in composed, the way people are when they think they can still manage a situation. He sat across from Felicia and her attorney and listened to what they had found. Halfway through, the composure broke. He didn't confess. People like him rarely confess in those moments. What he did was deflect, minimize, reframe. The LLC was a legitimate business structure. The transfers were loans that would be repaid. The vacation property was held in the family trust for asset protection purposes, which was completely standard. Felicia's attorney asked him to produce documentation of the repayment terms on those loans. He said he would have them prepared. They're prepared in advance, the attorney said, or they're not loans. The investigation by the Attorney General's office moved at the pace these things move, which is not fast. I won't pretend it was a clean, swift resolution. It wasn't. There were months of uncertainty. Felicia filed for divorce, and that process had its own timeline, its own particular grief. She and Eli stayed with me for 3 months, which was sometimes hard and sometimes the best 3 months I had experienced in years. Early breakfasts with my grandson, evenings on the porch with my daughter, the kind of closeness that ordinary life tends to crowd out. The nonprofit was placed under administrative oversight by the state while the investigation continued. The board, led by Agnes Burwell, who turned out to be exactly the kind of person you want in a crisis, cooperated fully and worked to protect the programs that served real children in real classrooms. That part mattered to me. The kids who had benefited from the arts education work were not responsible for what had happened in the financial layer above them. The civil case was filed on Felicia's behalf 14 months after that Friday night at my kitchen table. The amounts at issue, nonprofit funds misused, marital assets transferred to the LLC, my own contributions, came to just under $90,000 when totaled. The case did not go to trial. My son-in-law's attorney negotiated a settlement that required full restitution plus agreed-upon documentation of all transfers for the AG's office. As part of the agreement, he resigned from all nonprofit leadership roles in the state of Ohio. Whether additional criminal charges follow is still, at the time I'm telling you this, an open question. I have been advised not to speak to that directly. What I can tell you is that the AG's investigation remains active. Felicia got a job she loves now, program director at a legitimate community arts organization in Columbus. She chose the field deliberately. She told me she wanted to do the real version of what she had believed they were doing together. Eli started at a good public school, and his teacher told Felicia last month that he is thriving. On my daughter's first day at the new job, she called me on her lunch break. She said, "I keep thinking about all the years I let him handle everything because he made me feel like I wasn't good enough with numbers. That was on purpose, wasn't it? It wasn't a question." But I answered it anyway. People who need you not to look at the books will always find a way to make you feel unqualified to look at the books, I said. That's not a personal failing. That's a strategy. She was quiet for a moment. "You should teach that somewhere," she said. I told her I was already thinking about it. The county senior center has a financial literacy workshop series, and they've asked me to help develop a module on recognizing financial abuse by family members. I said yes. I start in February. I think about Vera sometimes, about that moment in the parking lot outside Fairview Medical Center when she grabbed my arm. I had almost walked past her. I had almost been in too much of a hurry. There's a version of the story where I cash out that CD, where I keep saying yes, where I find out the truth a year later or 2 years later, when there's nothing left to recover. What stopped that version from happening was a woman I barely knew. deciding that what she had seen was too important to stay quiet about, that it was worth the awkwardness, worth the risk of being wrong, worth saying the thing nobody wants to say to a mother about her daughter's husband. I keep that in mind now. When I see something that doesn't add up, when my instincts tell me something is wrong, I don't wait for certainty before I speak. Certainty is a luxury. Concern is enough. If you've ever been through something like this, or if someone you love has, I want you to know it doesn't mean you were naive. It means you were trusting. And trust, offered to the wrong person, can be exploited by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. That is not the same as weakness. That is not a character flaw. It is what happens when a calculating person chooses a generous target. The difference, I've come to believe, is what you do the moment something feels wrong. Don't wait. Ask the question. Make the call. And if someone in a parking lot grabs your arm and says your name, stop. Listen. Whatever they have to tell you may be the thing that changes everything. I still think about that parking lot. The way the October air felt sharp in my lungs. The way Vera's hand on my arm stopped me mid-step, and how close I came to saying, "I'm in a hurry," and walking right past her. There's a version of my life where I do that, where I cash out the CD, where I keep writing checks, where I find out the truth 2 years later with nothing left to recover. I've sat with that version long enough to understand something. The people who exploit generosity are counting on exactly that. They count on the discomfort of asking questions. They count on the guilt that comes with doubt. They build their entire system on the assumption that love will silence suspicion. What I've come to believe, and I believe it the way I believe things I've earned through living, not through reading, is that genuine care for someone sometimes looks like the hardest possible conversation. Vera could have stayed quiet. Agnes could have resigned from that board without ever speaking to me. Arlene could have said it wasn't her business. Each of them chose something more difficult than silence, and that choice is what made the difference. Doing right by someone, even when it costs you comfort, even when you might be wrong, even when it's awkward and unwelcome. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of character most people talk about, but very few actually practice when the moment arrives. I think about Felicia too, about what she said in her first lunch break at the new job, that she had been made to feel unqualified to look at the books. I taught teenagers for 31 years, and I recognize that move, the slow, patient work of making someone doubt their own competence so they stop asking questions. It's the same thing a certain kind of student does when they don't want you to grade their paper too closely. Scaled up, with real money and real consequences, but the same mechanism. Knowing how a manipulation works doesn't make you immune to it, but it does mean that the moment you recognize the pattern, you have a responsibility to yourself to stop deferring. Felicia moved fast when she understood what she was looking at. That took something real, not just intelligence, but the willingness to act on what she knew, even when acting on it was painful. That's the harder kind of smart. What strikes me most, looking back, is how much of this came down to endurance. Not dramatic endurance, quiet endurance. Vera keeping her eyes open for months before she said anything. Arlene spending evenings on the phone with old contacts. Agnes holding that board together while the documentation she had requested went unanswered for 8 months. Me sitting at my kitchen table at midnight going through records with my daughter, both of us exhausted, neither of us stopping. None of that is glamorous. All of it was necessary. The people who hurt Felicia and me were looking for the path of least resistance. They found something else. I started the senior center in February. I'll tell them what I tell you now. Trust your instincts early. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable, and do not let anyone, family or otherwise, make you feel that protecting yourself is the same as failing to love them. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. And the sooner you know that, the better equipped you are for the moments when it matters most.